Hey folks, welcome to Narratives. Narratives is a podcast exploring the ways in which the world is better than in the past, the ways it is worse, and the paths towards a better, more definite vision of the future. I'm your host, Will Jarvis, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. You can find show notes, transcripts, and videos at narrativespodcast.com. Tonight, I'm joined by Katja Grace and Quinn Lewandowski. Hey, Katja. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well.
Great. Good. Could you go ahead and just give us a quick bio and what you're interested in? I know it's a lot, so this is good.
I guess I work on trying to forecast artificial intelligence, and in particular, how it will affect society in the future. In particular, whether it will affect it very badly in the further future, perhaps. Or when I say forecast, I mean very broadly, just like what's going to happen. Will it be bad in some way? What kind of problems will arise? Which involves a lot of researching things other than artificial intelligence. So I probably know a lot more about, discontinuous progress in cotton gin technology than I do about the cutting edge of AI. My interests are broader, I suppose. I blog about a lot of different topics. I guess how society works, minds, game theory, philosophy. As I feel like I'm interested in all kinds of things. When I look online at a list of topics I'm allowed to see for some magazine or something, I realize I'm interested in almost nothing. Like, it's like, do you want sport or lifestyle or but it's hard for me to describe what the category is that I am interested in.
That's really good. No, I love that. Quinn and I also, we've got these really wide variety of weird interests that connect in some way. We're not sure how exactly, but I'm sure you connect somehow. How did you decide on AI as the important thing? I think this is, people hear about it. We've been talking about it more, I feel like, after Nick Bostrom kind of originally, I feel like maybe he helped popularize some of the existential risks with AI. But how did you, come to think, AI, this is the big issue that I should work on that's important?
Yeah. I guess when I was 13 or so, it occurred to me that it's possible to spend money on, for instance, helping people who are starving. And I was like, whoa, obviously I should do that.
That's good.
Like, somehow it just hadn't occurred to me that like the money we were spending on random things around my house was fungible between that and like saving people's lives. So I was I guess as a teenager, until I was maybe like 20 or something, I was like very committed to saving all of my money for that kind of thing, basically.
That's awesome.
Except like what was necessary for eating or something. And I guess over time that kind of broadened into, but if there was like something even more important than like helping people who are starving right now, I guess I should do that instead. And so it kind of gradually broadened into just like, I should try and figure out what the best way to help the world is. And do that. And so I guess I went through, maybe it's environmentalism for a bit. And then when I left university, or I guess I sort of went on a holiday from university and took a trip around the world that I'd been given as a present for my birthday, and ran into the people worried about AI risk. I guess this was in 2008. And they were like, have you considered worrying about this one? And I was skeptical and have remained somewhat skeptical over the years. But I thought it seemed like an important enough thing to really try and look into it and say better whether it is a big deal. Yeah.
I love that. No, and I like that. I like that journey of thinking about, how do I help the most? There's like very direct way, and then, how do you prioritize different things, right? How do you think about that? Um, can you talk about like the level perhaps of the listeners may have not heard of the term existential risk. Can you talk about what that is and like why that's so important that like people in the future matter a lot?
Yeah. I guess existential risk basically means something like human extinction.
Very bad.
Yeah. But I guess it's usually taken to be slightly broader to also include, situations where humans still exist, but somehow things are extremely bad, such that it's sort of no better than if humans were extinct. And it's maybe also somewhat more complicated by like maybe there are also situations where humans go extinct, but we like enough what there is instead of humans, or it's morally valuable enough that that we don't call it a bad outcome, in which case I think maybe that would often not be considered an existential risk. I'm actually not sure what the exact preferred definition is by the people who think more about this. But broadly, human extinction or something that bad. And I guess the reason that would be very bad, if that, to the extent that he's explaining, is that the future could be very long and very big. There seems like a decent chance of there being humans or other creatures able to have happy lives, in other parts of the universe. There's a lot of universe out there, so you could have a lot of optimism for the future, and it would be, unimaginably tragic if that were just sort of cut off.
That's great. So it's something like, we could, if we went out and we populated the galaxy in the future and there's billions and billions and billions and billions of people, and so, there's an extinction event next year due to, nuclear weapons or something, they would never exist. And that's something we should seriously consider and worry about.
Yeah. I mean, there's some question of whether like other creatures would arise in the future or elsewhere who would go on to do great things also. So it's all a sort of complicated question to work out how bad it is, I think, but it seems like a pretty bad thing to happen. Yeah,
definitely. So talk about existential risk, thinking about AI. Quinn and I were both part of a Slate Star Codex meetup group, and a lot of times AI will come up, and I work at an AI company and I have for about 5 years.
All right.
And I'm much more concerned about AI never happening and just general stagnation and, things just generally decay than the AI being bad and getting us or something, coming to get us and being evil and not being well aligned.
Interesting.
Yeah. What do you think about that? And do you think about that other risk as well, that like, we're like, oh God, we need to be too slow, and then we just never develop it and there's no progress, versus like, of course it needs to be well aligned because we don't want to die in like the Terminator movie. Like that would be very bad.
Yeah, I guess I think more about the it not being aligned type problem. But I do have thoughts on both. I guess
I'd love to hear it.
I'm less concerned about the it never happening one, in part because maybe I find it hard to imagine it never happening.
Nice.
Like I feel like even if we had quite a stagnation, or even if the current civilization sort of fell apart and we went back to sort of earlier stages of civilization,
still get there eventually.
I imagine that we get there eventually. I think it would be pretty surprising to just never do that. I guess some people would say that it like maybe it just can't happen. I find that hard to imagine. I think just
I don't think that's...
we have minds, like as a proof of concept. It would be surprising if you can only do that with biology, and or if you can't make anything much better than a human mind if you were trying and understood what was going on with them.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I like that. Do you think, the path forward you see for AI, is it something like brain emulation, like Robin Hanson thinks about, like Age of M, or is it just, algorithms slowly get better? I don't know if you've thought about that at all. I assume you have.
Some. I think my best guess, I haven't like researched it much myself. I'm sort of going by like other people having discussing it a bit and that sort of thing. My sense is that it's less likely that brain emulations come first. There's a question of what comes first, and then like you might imagine that in the long run there will be a lot of different kinds of AI potentially, and if brain emulations came first, you might imagine they would still ultimately make other sorts of AI, or if other AI comes first, there might still be good reasons to want brain emulations.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think currently maybe my main expectation, which isn't necessarily amazingly informed, is that the kinds of AI we currently have that aren't that good become better and better, and that's how we get something that's roughly human level at
Gotcha.
most things.
Just keep iterating up, and it gets more advanced over time.
Yeah.
I really like that. So my next question kind of goes off of that. You wrote a post, and it was about discontinuous progress in history.
Yeah.
What is that? And could you give some examples? And do you think that's gotten more common?
Yeah. So the post I wrote was sort of summarizing a bunch of work that several people at my research group AI Impacts did. So what we did was we wanted to know, is it likely that artificial intelligence very suddenly gets better at around human level? Because that was often a concern people had or have, that it would sort of be going along, not looking very very exciting, and then quite suddenly, like there'd be like one insight that would take you to general AI, and suddenly it would be able to do a lot of things. So we thought a place to start on that is just how often does that happen with any kind of technology. So to answer that, we tried to look at other technologies and see how often it happens. But it's I guess we didn't just like take a lot of random things and then see if they were discontinuous, which might have been a better way to tell like how common such things are. Instead, we were just sort of like, all right, can we find anything like this? Like, do these things ever happen?
Yeah.
And we determined, yes, they do happen, like probably not that rarely, but given the way that we went about it, it's hard to say definite things about the frequency, except that it's like not never. So from the ones that we saw, it looks like, or they're distributed over time such that most of them are in, let me just look at the graph here again.
Yeah.
Most of them are in the I guess 18 and 1900s, and sort of getting rarer, going back to like I think 1000 AD. No, there was even, I guess the pyramids actually were also one. So going way back. But I think this could very easily be just from like which things do we know about, and I guess more recently in history they weren't getting more common. I think like the 40s and the 50s had, or yes, maybe especially the 50s had the most in recent decades. So it wasn't like getting more common, in the 1990s and 2000s. But that could very easily be from like which things do people know about? Because we sort of crowdsourced these. We were like, have you heard of anything that was just a sudden jump? And it's easier for people to hear, I think, about things like, telegraphs and trains and giant buildings,
right,
than like, tiny things going on with improvements in computing or something that they don't see.
Right. Much more vivid.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me, we had one of my favorite professors from college on a couple of weeks ago, and he is an expert on the 17th century England, 16th, 17th, I should say, and especially on Francis Bacon and a lot of his work. And I asked him, was Bacon's method really that new? Was it really like a new thing? And he's like, well, I've looked at it and all the, everything he was reading and all of his manuscripts. And he's like, yeah, I think it was like that new. Like it really was a quantum leap.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting. Like, so things like that do happen sometimes. And it's like, that's a good thing to be concerned about and at least have your eye on, right, when you're thinking about AI forecasting. It seems like that's cool. I've got another question, Katja, and it's going back a little bit. why did it take humanity to kind of start getting going and everything? If you look at just a line of growth, it's just flat, 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 flat until you get to the Industrial Revolution. And then, everything starts shooting up. You wrote a post and you mentioned, we didn't get rope until like 28,000 years ago. We didn't get the wheel for, it's a scary amount of time. We didn't get writing until about 3000 BC. Why do you think progress was so slow and then it suddenly just started accelerating?
Yeah, I mean, I I think it's a very confusing question. Yeah, I guess I wrote about how confused I was about that, and then people suggested lots of different answers to me, so I wrote another list of them. But I guess none of them really struck me as like, oh, that's clearly the answer. And I don't know that any of them came with like anyone else being like, yeah, I'm an expert on this, and this is the answer, by the way. I think ones that were interesting to me, or seem sort of plausible, or let me look at this book here. Or I guess one that was interesting is it's like there's actually progress in concepts the whole time as well, and like just even the concept of trying to make things better as a goal that you might be focusing on is newer. I think that one seems kind of wild, but
that's pretty wild.
But
it's
interesting to think about. I think maybe a more plausible one to me that's perhaps a bit related is that, for instance, I guess rope is one that I thought especially about because introspectively it feels like if I was if I had almost nothing, but I was carrying things around, it would occur to me to try and make something like rope. And also, I feel like it's not that hard to make something like rope out of plant matter. I feel like I used to do it when I was a kid sometimes.
Right.
They weren't necessarily very good ropes, but I'm like, in a whole lifetime with, hanging out with big leaves and stuff, it doesn't seem that unlikely, I would think of it. So it's sort of surprising if it doesn't happen in, I don't know, like hundreds of lifetimes. Like consecutively, and lots of people living during that time. But I think I could imagine is going on is that it occurs to me to make something like rope because I have some sort of affordance to tie things up, which is because I've seen rope before. And so it's like I have an impulse to find a rope-like thing and tie. Whereas if I'd never seen that, it just wouldn't occur to me, which makes me wonder, like, what like that are we not seeing now? Like maybe maybe there are other things around that I don't know, that I could actually think of, and they're just invisible because I've never used such a thing. Another interesting one was like there are sort of basic solutions to lots of things, but most of them sort of don't get built on, and so they aren't useful in the long term. Like in the rope example, for instance, maybe I want to know how to carry this pile of food with me. And so I look for solutions, like I do have a concept of let's make this better. And I'm like, oh, I can get my kid to hold it. Great. And then it's like, all right, problem solved. But that one doesn't get improved on well into, better ropes or something that we would then remember. Yeah, I guess I ended up with maybe like more than 20 different ones people suggested.
Nice.
But yeah, there's some of them.
Yeah, that is really interesting, right? Like, how do you go to make that first step from just the first person to create rope, going from 0 to 1? Like, it's a completely, like, if you don't have no prior concept of it at all, it's a pretty wild leap to make.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Let's see. So you wrote a post, and it was a list of high-level narratives about what was going on in the world. And this is where this a couple of months ago. I really enjoyed this one. Do you mind if I ask you about a couple of those
go ahead.
kind of statements?
Yeah.
Cool. So one of them was Western civilization is declining on the scale of half a century, as evidenced by its inability to build things. We used to be able to build things, and the ceasing of apparent economic acceleration towards a singularity seems like a big deal. And I kind of paraphrase there. Um,
Yeah.
So do you think the tech stagnation thesis is a real phenomenon? Is that correct?
Well, I guess with all of the high level narratives that I wrote in that post, I didn't mean to endorse them.
Just,
So it was
these
more
are
like
potential.
these are potential ones.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think on that one, I haven't looked into it that much, so I'm unsure what the status of the evidence is. I think there are some things that are pretty notable, like I guess like actually during COVID, I think I more had the sense of like, wow, we just can't do
Really bad
things
at
that,
this.
yeah. Especially, I don't know, seeing other places do better. And as I also wrote a post actually about like New York's effort to vaccinate lots of people, whenever that was, like 1947, and that it seemed like it was maybe 50 times faster
Oh, wow.
Than New York's effort to vaccinate people against COVID. Sort of like, well, that's a very notable fact. Yeah, and I guess a thing I do know more about the evidence for is like economic growth, where if you look over long-term history, I think, and try and fit a curve to it as gross world product gets bigger, also the economy doubles faster, roughly. And so I think for a lot of history, if you had looked forward, you would say, oh, it's going to reach a kind of singularity at a certain point. Like it's going to, just mathematically, it looks like it will go to infinity at a point. Though, presumably in reality, something else will happen. But I think it sort of stopped looking like that at around 1950. And so that's an interesting thing to note.
Definitely. And it does seem like there are long-ranging consequences of that, growth kind of leveling off a little bit and not just, rapidly accelerating towards infinity, which would be good.
Hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the vaccination stuff. I also wrote this very brief piece complaining about vaccination distribution here in North Carolina, where we are.
Right.
They had a problem where they literally they weren't getting them out of the warehouses. It's just like they're sitting in the warehouses and no one's going to get them. And it was just baffling to me why the governor just couldn't send, the state highway patrol. Literally, you send them 1-day course. This is how you give an injection. You tell each of them to go pick up 100 doses, and you could have, all of these vaccines distributed within like 1 or 2 days. What do you have any sense on why we've gotten so bad at doing something so simple?
I have guesses. I have no particular reason to expect that guesses are better than other people's. But I think that like some of it is like regulations and things, where I think maybe in the 1947 case, I think it was much more like, well, let's just get anyone to volunteer to put needles in people. Like, let's just do it as fast as possible. And whereas now I'm assuming that, it's harder to do that. I think I wonder about, like, in the COVID case that doesn't seem like it can be like that is, I guess initially seeing, pictures of China and maybe a few places near me, there are cafes that move their counter to the door and then serve through the door, so no one has to go inside. And that seems like a very simple solution that like any particular cafe could do, say. I think there are like no cafes near me like that, or like it's quite a walk to get to one that's doing that. And I'm like, why is that? Like it seems like regulation is not preventing that. Is it that no one really cares about it? I would think it's sort of bad for the staff, at least. Like, even if each customer is fine standing in a room with 10 people for 5 minutes to get their coffee, like the staff are spending a year like mingling with like every resident near here. And I feel like usually if there was a thing that a cafe was doing that would, I think when I calculated it, it was like maybe in a year it would take 3 cafes to have actually killed a person or something like that from
God.
COVID. Like usually if a cafe was doing something that would kill someone every 3 years, like there would be some pressure for them not to. But I guess one thing I wonder about all of this is that there's some thought that a lot of human progress comes from us sharing ideas well between us, and that each human isn't that great at like thinking of good new ways to do things that actually go well. And so while it seems like we're sort of inventive on our own and able to solve problems, that's not where the main action is. The main action is in like cultural things spreading if they work well. And so if there's a very new problem like a pandemic, we get to see how poorly equipped we are for things where we have to just think on our feet about what to do. I think the pandemic has pushed me more toward thinking that's going on, but it's still very confusing to see on a small scale, I think. Yeah, like these things where you think you could just go and pick up the vaccines.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I'm reminded, I have this feeling that humans are, pretty good at copying each other, but really just not very good at rationally optimizing. And in fact, they've done these studies with pigeons. I think they give them like the Monty Hall problem or something. And a lot of pigeons can outperform quite a few people on these kind of rationalization problems. So rationally optimizing problems.
Right.
So I wonder if that is part of it. It's like really at the end of the day, our superpower is just like, oh, that works. That's rope. That's great. We're going to do that. And we're going to implement that. Or, we've got this cafe. Wow, our neighbors are doing that. That seems like a good idea. But on our own, we're just like, I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah. Which I think interacts interestingly with the AI concerns, because often that's phrased as like, well, humans with their amazing brains have like done great things. But if it's more like the network of humans passing ideas between them have done great things, and now we're going to add more nodes to that network that are different, it's like less clear what you should expect to happen there, I think.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. That's a good way to think about that. Next question is the statement you put in there. So everyone is going to die the way things stand. And I believe that, this is a very bad thing. I think this is a very bad thing. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on, cryonics, anything like that? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Yeah,
I think it's a good idea. I mean, I guess there are different meanings of good idea. I think like if you're looking for the best altruistic way to spend money, I think it's probably not that. But I think, everyone puts a lot of effort into, preserving their own health and looking after themselves. I think, like as a way of looking after yourself, it seems like a great idea. Yeah, I think I enjoyed the Wait But Why article about this. It was sort of describing it as like, well, there's not a particular point that's like you're dead. It's just like, when can they revive you? Like now we can revive people who have been quite cold, or their heart has stopped for longer than in the past, whereas in the past it was just like they keeled over and like you're dead. But at the point where we can actually freeze you, and in the future we'll be able to wake you up again, like we shouldn't really be calling you dead yet, because you can be revived. Yeah, so I'm not signed up for cryonics though. It's on my list, of things to do. I haven't got to.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
no, that makes sense.
I probably want to look into it a bit more before I actually do it. But on my current level of understanding, it seems like a great idea.
Gotcha. Quinn, I know you had a question about communities. Was that correct?
Yeah, I think about we were talking about overrated, underrated, right?
Okay.
You always do that list of things, and I brought up the question about thinking for yourself versus distributed social cognition, where you should trust what your society tells you, and it kind of seems like what you just said goes to that. I mean, I had a friend, just not a really close friend, but growing up, who had Down syndrome, and so that was kind of a really strong, immediately available proof of concept that you shouldn't always try to think for yourself. There are times where you can be reasonably confident that the people around you do know better about enough stuff that trying to figure everything out for yourself is almost suicidal.
Yeah.
But I'm very unsure where the cutoff is for, because if you don't think for yourself, you do leave on the table the possibility of doing better than your society.
Of what, sir?
Of doing better than the people around you.
Yeah.
Which seems like a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question and quite hard. I think there's sort of a tendency, I guess, among as me and people like me to I think start off as like young people being like, oh, I don't understand why people are doing these things. They're probably silly. I just won't do them, and then I'll do better than society. Why do we have to get up in the morning? And why don't we eat ice cream for breakfast? And why do we have Christmas? None of these make sense. All right, I'm just going to stop. And then kind of later on coming around, and I think I guess the idea of Chesterton's fence here is one that I find helpful for thinking about things where the idea is if you come across a fence in a field and you don't know why it's there, then you shouldn't take it down if you don't know why it's there, because then like maybe there's a bull behind it. If you do know why it's there, that's when you're allowed to take it down. And so I think for deciding, so I think like, younger me is doing exactly the wrong thing by being like, I don't know why we have breakfast in the morning. How about we don't do that? Whereas if you're like, oh, the reason we do this thing is X, Y, Z, and actually that made sense for other people, but doesn't make sense for my goals, then I won't do it. But I think that it gets really complicated, because I think often it's hard to know why a thing did become a thing that lots of people do, and often other people don't know the reason. So I think another kind of failure that happens is you ask, hey, society, why do you do this thing? And society gives you a whole lot of bad reasons. Like, in high school, you're like, why do I have to do this math? And the math teacher is like, well, you need to buy groceries as an adult. And so you'll need to sum up numbers to buy the groceries. And you're like, oh, actually, well, I know that I have a calculator, so that's not important. And then you don't study math, but it turns out that math was actually good for lots of other things. And I think this sort of connects with the same thing I was mentioning, where often things kind of spread by copying, and the individual people haven't thought them through well, where the reason you're learning math at school is sort of more like coming from a selection effect or something, where maybe for some bad reason someone decided to start teaching it, and that happened various times and it went well, or people liked it, or it seemed helpful, and then it stayed around, rather than like your specific math teacher knowing what the ultimate good of it was. Yeah, so I think I'm still fairly confused about when it's reasonable to decide that you know enough about a thing and enough about what your values actually are to not do it. But I think it's also good to separate what you act on and what you sort of tentatively believe to some extent, where like I think if you're in an area where you think that other people probably know better than you, it's still good to have your own guesses about the thing, so you can like practice thinking about it and better come to understand it. But then just like actually make your bets based on the wiser guesses of someone else that you don't understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
definitely. I think that's a really good approach. Katja, you wrote a post on advertising. This is kind of a left turn, left turn, but somewhat related. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of your broad thoughts on advertising? I thought it was really interesting. It's all over the place now. Billion-dollar companies built on the back of advertising in different ways all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I guess I I tentatively think it's pretty bad. I think, or well, no, maybe I have very mixed feelings that are maybe controversial in different directions. I think to the extent it's grabbing your attention in lots of situations where you didn't want it, I think it's just bad and is a way of stealing something that shouldn't be stolen. And basically that's just an externality where other people can grab your attention without you being able to stop them. And I think if you could, like, if the property rights were well defined here and you could like pay some small amount to not have your attention grabbed in these cases, I think it would very often be worth it. And so it's basically just doing harm. It's like as if you just couldn't stop people from picking your pockets whenever you went outside or something. I think that the service though of like figuring out which things you might want and telling you about them is actually a valuable service that someone might want. I do in fact want sometimes. Like I think actually I enjoy the ads on Facebook a lot. I think I might enjoy them more than the content, which is also a controversial view. They're somehow so good at figuring out what I might want. I don't understand what kind of spying they must be doing to carry this out, but like I often buy the things they want or the things they suggest. And I think often I wouldn't have known that they were available. I think recently I wanted to buy running pants for my boyfriend. The way I went about looking for good ones was I just Googled a few times what are the best running pants for men or something, hoping that Facebook would like realize this is what I wanted, and it worked, and that they started advertising running pants to me. Also, I clicked on some of their ads for that, and then they just went crazy, and I think I got maybe like 7 different fancy running pants brands, which didn't ultimately lead to good running pants, I admit. It's hard to buy clothes on the internet because you have to try them on. But another time I had a blog post about round seals, like the kind of mammal, with photographs of them, and then Facebook advertised to me this like stuffed round seal. I was like, wow, that's very precise.
That's very specific.
I think there are other sort of specific ways that ads are bad, or different ways of thinking about it. I think they're sort of like a voice that is there talking to you that can just change the vibe of the situation often. Like if you just had a sort of annoying person following you around as you wandered around town, that would make the experience worse. And for me at least, I think ads are often like that, especially notably I guess in the UK subway for some reason.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gotcha. No, I think that's quite interesting. And so you mentioned stealing attention as being, very bad and perhaps something people don't realize. I agree. I think that's really important because human attention, it's how we solve problems in the world, and it's a limited resource. And if it's getting burned up looking at, subway ads on the subway, you're not solving other problems, which is a real problem.
Yeah.
I wanted to move on now and do a quick round of overrated and underrated. So I'll just throw a term out and give us, your thoughts on it.
All right.
GMU econ, overrated or underrated?
Ooh, I think probably underrated. I can't speak to like everything that has ever come out of GMU econ. I've probably seen a very tiny fraction of it, so I'm not necessarily endorsing everything. But I think I've heard a lot of interesting ideas from left field from there, and I've appreciated their contribution to my mental world. Yeah,
I love it. Let's see, colonizing planets other than our own, overrated or underrated?
Oh, I think a mixture. I guess probably many of these things are going to be different for different crowds. It seems like in the long run, it's going to be important to, go to space and colonize other planets, and that for the most part people hardly think about that, so it seems very underrated in that sense. I think to the extent people are excited about colonizing planets soon, my guess is that's sort of overrated in that it doesn't seem very economically workable, or like I mean, it seems perhaps feasible, but not like there's a good reason to do it except like wanting to have done the thing in the near future.
Definitely. Aphorisms, overrated or underrated?
Oh, I think underrated.
Underrated.
Well, at least I like a good aphorism. But,
that's good. I think they're quite helpful.
They're very short.
Yeah.
I do appreciate writing being short. That's that's a passion of mine.
Are you a Hemingway fan?
I actually haven't read much.
Oh, there's. You should.
I'm sometimes criticized for trying to write too much like him, so I probably should read him.
What about Dashiell Hammett? They had the same editor, and we know Hemingway was a really big Dashiell Hammett fan, and we know Dashiell Hammett wrote in that style first, so I'm a big Dashiell Hammett fan, and I know there's academic debate about whether Hemingway stole it or just read it and then independently reinvented it, and I don't find the latter very credible, but I also think it's a good thing that, he took an idea that was working and used it to do more good things, so I don't think we should call that, sorry, it wandered into something I have a passionate interest in. So, any Hammett?
I don't think so, no.
Well, Katja, that's all the questions I had. And Quinn, I think that's all the questions you had too, as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Awesome. Well, Katja, I want to thank you for coming on and chatting with us this afternoon. This has been quite wide ranging. Do you have any, parting thoughts, anything you'd like to leave with anybody, or, and also where can people find your work?
Oh, well, my work is on the AI Impacts website is my work, which is aiimpacts.org. More wide-ranging non-work output is these days mostly at worldspiritsockpuppet.com.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was a really interesting conversation. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Katja. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Narratives.